Lou, if we can come to you first, what's in your coaching toolkit?
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this actually and giving it some thought. And I think there's sort of two parts to my toolkit. There's my tools as a coach, i.e. models that I use, and then the toolkit or toolbox that I share with my coachees, sort of exercises and stuff like that. So there's kind of two elements for me. I think in terms of me as a coach, I train with David Rock. So David Rock's actually, commonly known for the scarf model and Dance of Insight. So my training was quite interesting because it was learning his system, his process, his model, so to speak, as opposed to lots of different models. So it was quite deep, a really deep dive into his philosophy. So what I learned, a model called Create, which is actually quite similar to Grow. It's about, current reality and options, very, very similar to Grow. And we used a sort of a model that sat within that called Dance of Insight, which is commonly known again, and it's more of a flow to the conversation really than a model or a process that you follow. So those two things have been the absolute bedrock of my coaching practice, and I learnt them, and I learnt them deep, and then I have used them for years, well, for my coaching career, all the way through. Obviously, as I developed, I added in different techniques and exercises. NLP is something I'm really interested in, the whole mindset piece and techniques and tools. So, and creative, the kind of creative side and visualization. So there's bits that I've added on, but the core for me has been David Rock's philosophy. And that's who I am as a coach, really. And his approach is more around the sort of neuro leadership. So it's kind of leadership coaching really, and performance coaching, and that's kind of my training. So if you think about, it's very much about what's the goal, what's the objective, and how we're going to break that down, and what are the actions around that. So it's almost a bit project managey really in its approach, rather than maybe Gestalt, which has come from psychotherapy and has more of a therapy feel to it. So yeah, that's kind of my approach. And in terms of toolkit or toolbox for my coachees, and maybe this is something we can talk about later, but yeah, loads of things that I share, from values to unpicking limiting beliefs, passions, talents. There's lots of things in my toolbox that I share with my coachees. So in summary, yeah, it's two areas: my tools as a coach, and then the tools that I would share potentially with a coachee if appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why don't we come back to the tools for the coachee actually, because it'd be interesting to get everybody's thoughts on that. Just a quick question, Lou. What was it attracted you to the David Rock philosophy and model of coaching in the first place?
Well, this is back in 2006, so it was one of the only ICF accredited schools in the UK
Right.
at the time. There was a few others. There was Coach University. There was very, very few at that time. So for me, it was really important to have that sort of those credentials. I think, to answer your question, it was the neuroscience, neuro leadership, that I'm really into all of that. And we've spoke about this before, about mindset, neuroplasticity. That was it. And it has my training had a real sort of NLP feel to it, as well as coaching. So it was sort of ticking a lot of boxes for me, and that's why I chose it. Yeah.
Interesting. Ali, what's in your coaching toolkit?
So when I did my training, I mean, I'd used Grow a lot before in the workplace around coaching training. And when I did my coach training, I guess we started off a bit around the ICF competencies, a bit of a framework for our coaching conversations, but it was very much, we were given lots of different tools and models. So coactive things around NLP, visualization, transactional analysis, possibly elements of solution focus, lots of kind of different bits. And it was very much, we'd have a model introduced, and you'd really kind of then explore and experiment with it. And it was very much about finding your own style, I think, and finding and using the things that you like the best or felt more comfortable with. So I probably have more of a leaning towards the coactive. So that piece for me around coaching the person, not the topic, and kind of going more into that, okay, well, what's behind this? And I think there's elements, again, I really liked the transactional analysis side of it. And for me, it was kind of getting over. For me, that's about analysing transactions. It's kind of, it does what it says on the tin, but it's thinking, I think, with people, the interactions that they have with people and the behaviors or what they display based on that. And that, again, I had a real affinity with. So then went and did what they call the TA 101, and sort of did a further deep dive into that. And then there was another one built on TA 202. So that's probably something that I use quite a lot, and I use some of the different models, the drama triangle, the OK Corral, the parent, adult, child. So that often will form a lot of the conversations that I use, but very much, I would say, leaning towards the coactive side of things. But again, I think, and I guess that's as you grow more and you develop more as a coach, it's trying new stuff and experimenting with stuff. And that comes with time, it comes with confidence, and kind of with the thing that, you know what, I might not get it right. And I can think of a couple of examples, I think particularly with visualization stuff, when I've got it wrong. But you learn from it. But I think you do have to kind of take that opportunity to think, you know what, I'm going to have a bit of a play. And I think that was the beauty of the course that I did. It was very much, here's a model, go and have a play with it, go and experiment it amongst yourselves and use it, so that you could really, I think, see how it worked for you. So you, I'm going to say, had the experience of it being done too, as well as using it as well. So you got to see the benefits from both sides.
That was going to be my question, actually. Were you encouraged as part of your development as a coach to experiment with all of those different things? And as you just touched on, not just experiment, but experience it as well. It's pretty important, isn't it, actually, to understand what it feels like to be challenged to think creatively or be coached in a certain way as well.
And I think it's that whole thing, and again, it's the bit that you learn is what works for me and what I may really value from being coached won't necessarily work for other people.
Yeah.
But that's not saying don't be afraid to try it, and don't be afraid sometimes, even if for your coachee you think it might push them out of your comfort zone. So I remember one of the sessions we purely just had to bring something to talk about an object. It was an object or something, or a analogy or a metaphor that meant something to you. And I'm thinking, oh my God, why are we doing this? And I bought a camper van. So that was my thing, was a camper van. I'm like, I love camper vans, and I don't know why I love camper vans. And we spent half an hour exploring. That was the person coaching me, was about my camper van. And I kind of got that bit at the end. I got it, but I'm kind of thinking, this is weird. I don't really know what this is all about. But then sitting it and experiencing it, but that's not to say that wouldn't work for somebody else. It won't. And it's not being afraid to try it, but also don't be disappointed if they don't come away with that, oh my God, my camper van's amazing moment, at the end of it.
Yeah, we've got to be open-minded ourselves, haven't we? We talked about growth mindset in a previous conversation, didn't we? So it's pretty important when it comes to this conversation. Louise, what about your toolkit?
So similar elements from Lou and Ali, I think. So like Ali, I got trained in a whole host of different things. So, it almost felt, now reflecting back, and I've looked back at some of my old paperwork and course materials, God, we did so much and had exposure to so many models. And it was about finding, like Ali was saying, finding something that worked for you personally, you felt comfortable and competent with, and confident to try out on others. So we did touch on a lot of things, and now obviously coming back into this environment, and now we're supporting our own trainee coaches going through a process as well. It's really interesting to understand the huge variety that's out there, and actually the depth and detail we can go into. So it's been really refreshing for me to touch base on a few different ideas and refresh my knowledge and whatever. I'm kind of loath to align with one or two models, or say I was trained in a certain way, because as I said, I had exposure to everything on the ICF accredited course I took. And I feel a bit kind of jack of all trades, master of none. And I know that's one of my limiting beliefs, and a bit kind of that I carry that baggage. But to me, it kind of fits it's the way I learn. I learn a little bit here. I might go down a rabbit hole. I kind of have quite an extensive, broad knowledge of a lot of things, but don't necessarily have a huge detail against a lot of things. A few things I do, but not as much as my kind of breadth of knowledge. So within that, I try and see how that could work for a coachee. And I guess for me, it's about, I feel then I'm very flexible and agile to be able to personalize the experience for the person in front of me and hopefully very quickly understand what might suit them. And because I'm not attached to a particular model or a philosophy, then that allows me to be a little bit more experiential or a bit creative, or at least just be more fluid in where the conversation might go. Or, you know, across 4 or 5 sessions, we might actually cover quite a range of tools or philosophies or whatever. And because I'm not necessarily an expert in all of those things, a lot of the things I set, I'm quite action orientated, a bit like Lou was talking about. I'm quite, I like that journey, that movement. So often I might send them away with a bit of a homework piece and go and tell them to go and read a bit more about this, or send them an article link or whatever. And again, it's encouraging them to learn and empower themselves in their learning. So they're kind of, I'd like to think by the end of it, they've got their own mini toolkit as well. So that's kind of how I like to see it working. Whether it plays out like that fully for everyone, I don't know. But broadly speaking, that feels right for me.
Mm. What's coming up quite strongly, listening to all three of you, is this, even if it's, you know, just the David Rock thing for you, Lou, or whether it's reading everything, you know, all the models that are out there for Louise and Ali, what I'm hearing is like the words like there was an affinity with something, you know, something struck a chord, something spoke to me about, you know, what I was reading, which was a good fit. And I think that's definitely my experience as well, actually. So I'm very similar in that I wouldn't say I'm well read on every coaching model of philosophy, but I was encouraged to read the main ones. Let's be honest. You start with Grow, Coactive for me as well, Ali. You know, there was some things in there around not necessarily techniques and stuff, just to try ways of articulating what this whole coaching thing's about. You know, that clients are naturally resourceful and whole, and you know that I do believe that. I have kind of an unwavering belief in people's potential. You know, you just need the right opportunity, right stimulus, wherever it might be. So that spoke to me. So I thought, oh, I'll read more on that. And then there was bits of solutions focused. I quite like that little bit. So what you're experiencing is my experience as well, actually, and how much you then take on board of all of that. Obviously depends on you, but I guess just to pick up on something you said, Louise, as well, around kind of using the right approach for the client. It's a question for anybody to answer, really, is how do you know as a coach which part of your toolkit to use, or which part of your philosophy to use for best effect?
Well, bizarrely, so the first thing that jumps to my mind is using tenets of the Gestalt stuff, and I never really kind of had an affinity with that. I didn't really know an awful lot about it. It didn't feel quite me at first, but actually what I think I might have done, and suspect that maybe all of us have done, is use some of that Gestalt stuff to inform the response that a coachee gives us, or those shifts in energy, that body response, that kind of physical and verbal articulation that goes on, all that unknown stuff, and really listening out for all of that and picking up on it. So bizarrely, that actually there's a model in there that helps you then be creative and agile and respond to the person in the moment. So I guess maybe we're using, so kind of this is a learning point for me, maybe I'm using more tools and techniques than I realise. It's nice and natural, and I like to think of it as natural. I want to keep it as natural as possible rather than following a prescriptive kind of set formula. So that's quite an interesting thing for me to note, I think.
I think sometimes when you put a label on something, it becomes, like, I'm going to say Gestalt or coactive or what. I think sometimes you, not to say you can fall victim of being wedded to it, but when I learned coactive way back, it may have been introduced as coactive, but I didn't know it as coactive, and it was only kind of looking at some stuff around it in the last couple of years. I thought, oh right, that's so like you say, remember your client is creative, resourceful and whole. Coach the person, not the topic. That, you know, that intuition, that curiosity, it goes back to what you were saying, Louise, about that kind of natural, you know, sort of keeping the conversation as natural as possible. And I think sometimes, whether that's in our early stages as a coach, you can fall prey to sort of thinking, I've got to stick to this set way, and and you can become a bit wedded to it. So I think it's using that flexibility. And I think when you asked the question initially, Stephen, you said, you know, how do you know the right thing or tool to use? My initial response was, sometimes you don't. And it's just, I'm going to try this. It could be based on a previous conversation, you know, a previous session that you've had with the person, and you think, oh, that was really useful, or actually, I've not done this. I'm going to challenge him and use that way. But I think it is, again, it's that, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What shifts do I notice? What am I sensing? That I kind of think, let's try this, and, you know, ask, can I try this? And see what's what. But yeah, sometimes it is down to, it could be trial and error. If I'm going to say, in my opinion, that's my experience.
Yeah, part of the exploration, isn't it? Trying new things. It's part of the, not to sound trite about it, but part of the journey that you're on with people, I suppose. Lou, I mean, you mentioned, Lou, as well, you know, that there's lots of techniques for your coachees and stuff. So again, how do you introduce them in a way, you know, that you feel are going to be most beneficial? What's your gauge of what's the right approach for you?
Yeah, and whilst I sort of learnt David Rock's model or models, what's been interesting coming into a university and working with new coachees or trainee coaches, is that, yeah, there are elements of Gestalt. You don't know that you're kind of doing it. It's, as I say, it's quite natural, and visualization and NLP. You kind of you learn these tools maybe just through your own research, and sometimes you work with a coachee and something might come up, and often, and certainly in my early days of a coach, something would come up in a conversation, and I'd go off and research the best tools to help them, so I kind of had my resource to hand on the next session. That's how I built my toolbox, to be fair, was through just kind of getting into a situation and going, I need to go and educate myself more about this, or wonder what tool is out there that might be able to help them, and then learnt about things like perceptual positioning or NLP tools or whatever. So for me, my toolbox it was quite an organic process through just getting down and dirty, working with clients, and then getting stuck, trial and error, like Ali said, and then just going off, and my toolbox is literally bursting at the seams. And there are those ones we keep coming back to time and time again, but that's how my toolbox. So I had my core, my foundation, and then built things on top. And yeah, I might not have called it Gestalt, you're right, Louise, but actually you go, you know, I ask a lot of feeling questions. How does that make you feel? You know, so there are approaches that, yeah, you could say actually that falls into this philosophy, or this falls into this. So yeah, it's been very much a growth, you know, process for me over the years.
Yeah. One thing as well that I picked up on, just where we've got to in the conversation, I think, as well as having an affinity for things, the word confidence came up a couple of times, I think, in terms of just being confident enough to try something new, especially in the earlier days, I suppose, of your coaching practice and stuff. And it's funny, in preparation for our conversation, I was looking back on a reflective essay that I did when I was qualified back in 2015. I just thought I'll open it up just to remind myself of where I was at the time. And reading it now, you can see the sort of, what I think is quite common is, you know, as a new coach, you kind of latch on to the structured stuff, and yeah, because there's comfort there. And I even wrote in the reflective essay with respect to coactive Ali about not quite comfortable with the whole of life thing yet, in a manner of words, because it just feels bigger and a bit scarier. And do I feel like I've got enough experience or confidence to be able to explore that? So I don't know, that's useful or not, but I just thought confidence, I think, is quite important, because the more experience you get, the more you're more likely to experiment with stuff. But
and I also think, if I can just add, I think it's I have to be honest, I kind of learnt this system and kind of stuck to it like glue, because that's what I knew. And it's only through the years that you find the confidence and you try different things, and you add them sort of into the toolbox. And I was guilty of that, and it's been really interesting coming back into an educational setting in a coaching context, and it's stretched me, and I've honestly learned so much in the last sort of year or so, just being back in this environment. So you kind of there's just more to learn. You never stop learning. There's always something new or a different way of looking at things that you can add into the toolbox. So it's been a really interesting year for me, learning about or familiarizing myself again with different things, different models.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my next question really leads on from that, which is how much does your style change, or how has your style changed over the years? I know mine definitely has, and I've kind of alluded to there, with the whole of life thing. Now, I look back at that and look at it as quite a naive thing and think, well, how can coaching not be a whole of life thing? It's never just compartmentalized to work and not work and all that sort of stuff. So again, that's shifted for me in other ways. But what about for you? How has it developed in terms of the coaching style? Ali, I'll come to you first.
It goes back to that word confidence and just that experimentation to try different things. And I think probably been challenged more over the last couple of years in doing things virtually, and how can you adapt to a virtual environment rather than being in a room with somebody. So if you've used movement or the empty chair, or like you say, the perceptual positions, and you're getting, you're in a room with people and you're moving around, how can I create that in a virtual environment? And there are ways to do it. I've liked to use sometimes picture cards before. So, okay, how can I do that in the virtual world? Or objects, to represent people or things. Or so rather than me taking the objects, it might be, we'll go and find something in the room. So I think there's been a lot of adaptation in doing that in a virtual environment. And I think it's for me, I guess how it's developed, it's more that experimental. And perhaps I'm going to say me being a bit braver as a coach. Again, I remember my coach tutor saying to me, the question in your head should be the one on your lips. And sometimes it's that, oh God, should I ask that? Should I ask that? Should I ask that? The question's still there and it keeps popping up. So I think it's from me being braver about where I'll take it. I'm going to say with permission and with that contracting with the other person, but I'd say that's definitely how I've evolved. And you saying about reading back on your like your journals, and you hear it in working sometimes with coaches in their early days. Well, I haven't got a plan for how the session's going to work. And I was very much like, I've got a plan, it's going to go like this and it'll go like this, and it's not about me, it's about the other person. And letting go of that and just going in and not knowing where we're going to start and what comes next, to be able to let go of that was a big thing for me. And just to be in the moment, be present. I think the other thing that I start to notice, and this is probably again in the virtual environment, is around distraction, and making sure that distraction and that presence as when you're in a room with somebody, it's very different to when you're on the screen with somebody and they can't see all of you. So I think again, that's for me, just being very aware of how I'm showing up. Probably gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but that just thinking about that virtual piece.
Yeah. Louise, what about you in terms of your model and philosophy? Kind of, has it stayed rigid, or has it adapted and shifted and changed?
Yeah, definitely adapted. And I think all of those points that Lou and Ali have made in terms of growth and development and feeding your own kind of, curiosity about learning new stuff, and the confidence thing, and an age thing as well. It occurs to me that there's no coincidence that, the average demographic of our trainee coaches is, 44. I think there is a real kind of maturity, and I hate to use that, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way at all, but there's a real kind of life experience and a real kind of bravery that comes at a certain point in your life where you just want to learn more, take chances, get the best out of life, satisfy these kind of more curiosity kind of things, you know, that whole Maslow hierarchy of needs, all of that kind of stuff is definitely thrown into the mix. So I think perhaps the more mature and the more practice you have, the more brave obviously you're going to be, because you're more confident. And just picking up on Ali's point, I think that's really interesting about the shift to virtual, and it made me think that you're right. I kind of carried around this toolbox, and often it was physical. So I'd have my little coaching backpack, literally, with my coaching cards in, my coloured pens, my post-its. There might be a couple of graphics and quotes and pictures to pull out and all that kind of stuff, some exercises to do. And I very much kind of relied on that as a framework to have those coaching sessions. Then, of course, we've all gone virtual. And actually what I found now, thinking about it, is that I'm much more reliant on just asking good questions. I hope they're good, but more curious and open questions. So there isn't a framework to rely on. Yes, of course, I'll reference an article and I might share something post-session, like an infographic or a quote or something. But actually, in that moment, I found that I've now started to develop a much more even more person-centered, distraction-free. For me, Ali, I actually prefer online. I feel it gives me more focus, more time, and more attention to the person in front of me, which it sounds really bizarre, but that's my reflection, and that's kind of how it's transpired for me over the last couple of years. And I'm really enjoying having that extra tool in my toolkit, which is that focus and that time and attention, actually.
And it's interesting about virtual, because I've only ever coached virtually because of the nature of my client base being not necessarily in the UK. And in the early days, it was on the phone. Now, you try coaching without seeing someone, and you've got to listen on a completely different level. I mean, the attention, it's exhausting to coach that way. But that's how we did it. That's how I did it. We've kind of gone off on tangent to sort of virtual coaching here, but it's just really interesting. So I've always had to do it online. I mean, occasionally, yeah, I'd go into an organisation, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I totally hear you. And I agree with that. I think I prefer virtually, having done both, because you've really got to be in the zone and focused on them. And just to answer the question around, for me, my development was as my niche changed. So in my 14 years, I haven't always coached on the same sort of topic, and I wasn't a broad coach. I sort of niched in different areas, and as my niche changed, my approach changed. So if I was doing sort of career transition stuff, my toolbox would change to sort of meet the needs of the person in front of me. I did a lot of mindset stuff, so therefore my tools would be different for that. And then with business mentoring and business coaching, again, it was different. So for me, to answer that original question, it's changed as my niche has changed. That's how it's been for me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because that was something I was going to offer as well, about the fact that the clients change, and perhaps it's just I think you're right as well. All I heard, by the way, before Louise, was the average age of 44, which means I'm coming in just below average. So that's the boost I needed this week. So thank you for that. Just below, by the way. But I've been reflecting on it. Gestalt's been mentioned a few times right now. I think it is one of those. It felt for me like it's at the more advanced. Looking back, it was at the more advanced end. You know, there was more to. That's how it felt to me anyway. There wasn't as much structure. There wasn't much to get around. But it has something that it's creeping back in my reading, in my thoughts, in my experimentation. I've got a wonderful supervisor who is Gestalt coach. That's an influence as well. But I do wonder myself, is it because of I'm getting more experience and I'm getting a different group of clients to work with? Is it even I mean, the last couple of years have been referenced in terms of like virtual, but the pandemic, I seem to be dealing with a lot of topics which are at the existential end of the scale, questions of identity, ambiguity, just confusion, uncertainty. Is that just because I'm working with different people? Is it a result of the challenges we've all been? I don't know, but it is interesting, actually, Lou, to your point around what are the other factors that might not force you, but almost out of necessity, you need to adapt as a coach and have something else, because where there is uncertainty and ambiguity, just forcing people to think about options and what's the solution is not really going to be very useful. Equally, if someone's got a really specific target or just a result in mind, Gestalt might not be the right thing to do. So yeah, just an interesting reflection. But I think the clients changing might be an interesting one for people to think about as they watch this. Yeah. Final question, I should say. What would be your advice to any aspiring coaches who might be struggling to determine their own style? What would be your advice to them to start to figure out what that would look like?
For me, coaching hours, get coaching. Coach. And somebody said to me, I was having a conversation with a trainee coach yesterday, and we were talking about coaching philosophy. And I asked about, what kind of coach, what's coming up? What do you think? And the conclusion is, I don't know. And actually, in my opinion, it finds us. You kind of naturally try things out, and so it's coaching hours. And I'd also say hire a coach yourself or a supervisor. I think that's an important element. Every coach should have a coach, and that was one of the first things that when I was in training, you need a coach. You need to experience what it's like to be coached with a Gestalt approach or a David Rock approach or whatever. So I think there's two parts to that. Get coaching and then be coached. And I think that will help in that discovery.
And those hours, I think, once you've accumulated, you relax into it, don't you? It's all those factors kind of collide together to improve your coaching toolkit. And I think that being coached yourself and going through and testing out different things, working with lots of different clients, don't get stuck in that echo chamber. Really force yourself to get out there, coach youth, coach men if you've only ever coached kind of females, friends and families, that type of thing. I think that's all really, really helpful as well. And that whole kind of working with different sectors and working with different challenges and really building up your confidence and building up your hours there, I think is really, really important as well. And you're right to kind of pull that point about the pandemic's forced us to perhaps do slightly different style of coaching, or the themes are slightly different. But at the end of the day, there's still those common core themes that will come up time and time again, whether it's a 50-year-old businessman or a first-time mum at 33 that's struggling or whatever. So there's always going to be, I think, those common foundational coaching models or tools in our toolkit that are going to stand the test of time. And then, of course, we build on those and we flex and utilize them accordingly, don't we?
Yeah, I'd echo that. It's build up those coaching hours and it's experiment. And try something, try it again. Don't, sometimes you'll try things and think, oh, it didn't work. But try it again with somebody different, and just to kind of see how it works, I think would be my advice.
And I don't know whether you guys have done this as coaches, but and maybe this is just me because I don't create your own tools. Have any of you ever sat and, I've created many a tool without, I don't need permission, I just look at what's out there and go, I'm going to create my own four-step process here. So in my toolbox, there's lots of stuff that I have put together through looking at what's out there. I don't know whether you guys do that, but I've done that loads. Rather than use a model from 1952 by I've gone, I'm going to create the Lou model and have a fresh approach to it.
Yeah, I like that.
That was my journey, to be honest. Even in the very early days, I was encouraged to create something for myself, and something visual as well. Like literally a model that that you would see in the text, but create your own with your own words, with your own things, almost a visual crib sheet of this is how I coach. Yeah. So if you're asked that question, how do you coach, which is in a coach assessment type environment, that's the sort of question you might get asked by somebody. How do you coach people? So yeah, I was encouraged to do that. And if I'm honest with you, whilst there's new bits being added to it, it's remained pretty robust. The 7 years or whatever it is now that I've been qualified, it hasn't, because it is about who I am and what's important to me, like curiosity rather, like intuition, like all the other things that are the words on my model. They haven't really changed, but like what you've all articulated.
I find that really encouraging to hear that you did that, because that if I was designing a coach program, that's how I'd be approaching it. So here's all these different models, but what's your model? What does that look like? That's how I'd be doing it if I had a blank sheet. I get a bit frustrated with all these models from 50 years ago. I'm like, oh God, what's new, what's fresh, what's your approach to that? And that's how I'd be doing it. So I'm really pleased to hear that, because I think, yeah, then it's yours, you own it. You're not trying to squeeze into something that actually probably doesn't fit very well. You're kind of, it's yours.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
And there's that real authenticity and genuineness about it as well, and current kind of feel to it. And I think from a coachee perspective, then when someone's buying your service or they want that confidence in you as a coach, they can kind of see that you're living and breathing. You're literally role modeling your own model, your own philosophy, your own kind of values. They're all there tied up, aren't they? And they're visible and evident, and you're displaying them and demonstrating them in every interaction. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
And that's how you become an influencer in your field.
Yes.
Isn't it?
That's
how you get known.
That. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the point of difference here, is you can use other people's tools, but actually to really get traction in your chosen field, that's what.
Don't be constrained by other people's tools, because it can limit what you can do.
We are creative, whole and resourceful.
We are.
Exactly.
As someone once said, I can't remember.
Bracket 19. Yeah.